Beck from the Department of Mechanical Engineering. So the fourth faculty to be represented so far. Stephen has an interest in leaks, and this has led him to an interest in things that disappear. So I suppose ideas of renewable energy and energy where bits aren't leaking away. Also, sort of one of the themes of our speakers is often they're experiencing ideas of sustainable community, not just through their research, but also through being a body in an institution. And Stephen's is one of the only web pages I've seen that enthuses about sitting on committees. So he is part of the kind of sustainable community that is Sheffield University in a very kind of engaged kind of way. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen.
I'll just turn the microphone on. Last time I was giving a lecture, actually, one of the students emailed me to tell me that the microphone didn't work. That didn't work either because I turned my phone off. So there we are. I'm Stephen Beck, and as Kathy's just said, I lecture, as I call it. I inflict thermodynamics to first-year students, and that's just what I'm going to do to you because I'm good. Yes, I know that's great, isn't it? The whole idea of sort of renewable energy and things like that comes from a desire to do things better. And like many of the things we do at universities and things, we have to question what's going on. So what I'm hoping to do here is to show with a few examples and things that, first of all, it's easy to do things wrong, and if we think about what we're doing, we can start making things better. So I'm afraid I'm going to start off with some. Oops, no, I'm not going to start off with some. There we are. I'm going to start off with some thermodynamics because that's what I love. I know how you feel. My kids don't love thermodynamics. So thermodynamics is exactly the study of energy. I used to call my first year course, before it got subsumed as something else, heat, work and energy, and that's exactly what it's about. It's about converting energy from one form to another form, and that's what the renewable energy is about. That's what any sort of energy requirement is about. We don't think about energy that often, but it's very important to us. We've got lights on here, I've got a projector on here, we've got heating on here. And the interesting thing, particularly about electricity, is you can't store it. This electricity, these electrons, are being produced at this very moment. If somebody else turns on a bit of another light, what happens is, unless they turn on another power station, they steal a bit of electricity from everyone else, and they average it out. So we don't run it exactly the right way, right? So what we have to do with electricity all the time is to balance use against production. You know that the television, the people who work at power stations watch the radio times, the television schedules to work out what's going on. Do you know why they do that? Go on.
So when you want to put the kettle on for a cup of tea?
Almost. It used to be kettles, but nowadays people tend to use beer instead. Now it's when everyone flushes the toilet. And the other thing which we have to produce, which you have to do, is keep the water pipes pressurized. So when everyone flushes their toilets, the water pipes depressurize. So the water companies have to turn on extra pumps. The electric companies have to turn on extra power stations so that we can flush our toilet. So yeah, it used to be kettles, but now it's toilets because things run slightly differently. But what we get is we get lots of different. Okay, we get lots of different types of energy. Has this got a pointer on it? Oh, great. So we get lots of different types of energy. We get potential energy, energy due to things being lifted up, kinetic energy, the energy associated with something moving. We get pressures around us. To pressurize something requires energy. Internal energy is based on basically the heat of something is, how hot it is. And then we get these other two, which are very necessary for what's going to follow. Heat is energy transfer due to a temperature difference. So if you've got a hot thing and a colder thing, the energy moves from the hot thing to the colder thing, and that's the heat transfer. And you always get heat transfer if you've got a temperature difference between two things. The work is force with distance. So if you've got movement, like I'm doing now, if you've got movement like this, you're doing work. If something's moving, there's work associated with it. Interestingly, electricity, he says, pointing to the light, is also a form of work because you can convert that directly into movement using a motor. So heat is energy transfer due to a temperature difference. Work is energy transfer due to movement. remember those. Actually, you don't have to because I've got them written down here. Don't worry too much. Energy transfer associated with the force acting through a distance, and we've got some units associated with that. Remember, heat, temperature, work, movement. We then get the first law of thermodynamics. There are lots of different ways of writing it down. I said these come from my first year notes. But what we can see is that all of the energy terms that I gave you before, heat, work, potential energy, kinetic energy, internal energy, pressure times volume, they are all interchangeable. So the first law of thermodynamics tells us that all of these different forms of energy, heat, work, kinetic, potential, internal energy, and pressure and volume terms are interchangeable. So if we heat something up, we might increase the internal energy. They just all balance. There are lots of different ways of looking at that. I was going to play this from YouTube. Yeah, I know some of you have seen it before. I am not showing this for any prurient purposes. Okay? Oh, we don't have sound. Damn, it's brilliant. He goes down the hill, he takes off, he lands. Okay, that's brilliant. So, what we see there, and I'm not showing it for prurient purposes, is actually all about energy transfer, because this brings up lots and lots of interesting things. Are we in pause mode? Probably. So, what we get here, so bet you didn't think you were going to get, bet you didn't know you were going to get some film critique here. So what we've got is we've got the guy at the top of the slope. He is the possessor of potential energy. He goes down the slope. Da, 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 whee! This is good. He goes down the slope. He's converting his potential energy into kinetic energy. Pause down you. Sure. Now, let me just go back very slowly. I said this has not been done for prurient purposes whatsoever. Okay, so he converted his potential energy into kinetic energy. That's straightforward enough. What then happens next? He converts that kinetic energy. Oh, sorry, 75 seconds. No? So he converts his kinetic energy into what? Pain. As we'll cut, yes. Exactly, thank you, there's one of my first year engineers. Brilliant, you're hired. So what he does is he converts it into heat. So what we see naturally is the order of things happening. This is what's going to come in later in a few seconds. So we know that there is, let me kill this. No. We know we know that there's a natural order of things happening. If I'd shown you that, if we'd shown that film happening backwards, you would have thought, aha, there's something gone wrong here. And I've got into the wrong place because this is a Charlie Chaplin movie, or something like that. But what we find here is that there's a natural order of things happening. You don't suddenly see that heat energy from the guy lying on the floor suddenly turning into him up at the top of the hill. So what we actually find is that there's a natural order for things to go through. This is going somewhere, don't worry. So what we find out is that this is due to what we call the second law of thermodynamics. First law, energy can either be created nor destroyed. The second law tells us what order things happen in. And a good example of this is once again from my first year notes, where if we have a flywheel spinning in an insulated box, the flywheel possesses kinetic energy. If we leave that for a long time, the flywheel will slow down. It'll convert its kinetic energy into warming the box up. So what we find naturally is that the spinning wheel slows down, that energy goes into warming up the box, and that's the natural way of things happening. So what happens is, natural way of things happening is for movement to turn into heat. And we see that in exactly the same way from that guy, poor guy, and his cycle riding experience. I have a helmet, so I'm all right. Where are we at? So there's naturally a way of things to go easily. Don't worry, this is going somewhere. So if we look at these, which of these is easier to do? To heat our box up by spinning up a flywheel to speed and letting it cool down, or by putting a gas heater in there? I won't even trouble you to ask for an answer. This is clearly a lot easier because we have to have got the flywheel moving. And to actually get things moving like that is difficult. It's hard work, as they say. So typically how we would get that flywheel moving is we attach it to an electric motor. The electric motor's got to be attached to the electricity. The electricity comes from a power station. We burn some gas in the power station. Really indirect. So what we find here as well, which comes out of the second law of thermodynamics, is that that movement, that work, that movement, that potential is a much more valuable thing than heat. I mean, when we looked at that guy coming down on the slope, the amount of energy which was possessed in all of those pictures was roughly the same. But what happened was it went from the high quality energy at the top to the low quality energy of him giving up his energy at the bottom and it dissipating into the world, which is why we can't go easily from here to here. We need big power stations to do them. I have to put some equations in because otherwise I get fired. Here is one of the two equations for entropy that we've got, and this just basically tells us that ds, S is the symbol for entropy, is equal to something that's due to the irreversibility, that's due to friction and things in the system, and a bit that's associated with heat transfer, Q, the heat transfer. So what comes out of doing this in further mathematics, which I won't do, but I'll show you the results of, is to say that things have a natural way of going. And because of these equations here, we're able to say mathematically, physically, and such, which way things will go, whether processes are actually viable, whether they can happen, and also how good they are. This will come into what we do later. Are there any physicists in the house? One? Good. Have you come across that? Good. Excellent. This is another way of describing the same thing. There's another way. We've still got S there, entropy. This is the way that Boltzmann defined it. He was so proud of it that he actually got this written on his gravestone. Pardon?
What's entropy?
Oh, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
If you wait a second. Sorry, if you don't understand when I finish this slide, put your hand up again. Good. So, what entropy is the, in this case, is ds is k, which is its constant, times log w, and w is a number of ways that the system he's looking at can be defined, the number of different states it can be in statistical mechanics. And what entropy actually is, well, lots of different ways. That's a really bad question to ask. I could spend about the next 40 hours on it, or somebody could. It's disorder. It's the amount of disorder in a system. If we think of a pack of playing cards, for example, there's an ordered form of playing cards, maybe ace to king and the four suits. If we throw that up in the air and then gather it together, it'll come down in a disordered state. So if we want to put it back into that ordered state, we have to go through and put work in to sort it out. So it's the amount of disorder. Same as my daughter's room. If ever I want to find one of my jumpers, and they're not very good collection, I look on my daughter's floor, and that's where they are. She's converted my nice, neat jumper drawer into a disordered mess in her room, because the natural order of things to go is to become disordered. So we move from what was at the Big Bang, a highly compressed system of everything, we knew exactly where it is, where entropy and disorder and S was zero, into what we're getting at the moment is things becoming more and more disordered, further apart, less defined, and stuff like that. So the whole idea of entropy is a very complicated one because it brings in so many things. You can also, using this same equation here, actually define disorder in information and things like that. Actually moving ones and zeros from one form to another form increases the disorder in the world and things like that. It's got lots of different possibilities, which is why there are these different forms of it. But if we think about it in terms of disorder, something being lost, because energy can't be lost when we move from one form to another, what can be lost is the high quality of the energy. So the really high quality of the energy, is like at the Big Bang, when it was all a little thing about that size, was very high. As it gets spread out, it gets dispersed more and more. And because we can put numbers to it, we can define which way things go forward and which way they go backwards and things like that. I know it's not a magnificent description, but it's really complicated. Things get naturally more disordered, and we have to put in effort to reorder them. And that's this form of it. Because, sorry, I'm digressing badly, but never mind. When we get on to the playing cards, whatever order they come up in could be the order you wanted them to come up in. It's like the lottery. So that's what our different states, log W refers to there. The different ways that things can be reordered. And we have defined one of them as being the correct state. Good. On with modelling. Wind power. There we have a little wind turbine, what is it, about 60 metres tall. These are going up all over the countryside. I've got an equation there because, once again, I feel I need to put some equations in. W dot's the work term there. That's the area of the wind turbine, swept area there, density of air, and that V there, cubed, is the velocity of the wind coming towards it. So it's got a V cubed term on there. So if we double the speed of the wind coming towards it, the power output goes up, roughly speaking, by a factor 8. So if you put these in a place with a big wind, you get a lot more power out than if you put them in a place with slightly less wind. So nominally a really good idea. Let's see what it means. Do the camera. I remember, I like this, my favourite politician at the moment. No, he's not. No. So when he first moved into power, David Cameron said he was going to stick one of these up on his hat. Does anyone remember that? Probably not, you were too young. No, there. It's a B&Q wind-safe wind turbine system, 1,500 quid to you. Meant to give a kilowatt, yes, kilowatt at 12.5 metres per second. That's 30 miles an hour. It's unlikely your roof will stand up in that. So that's the first thing. Complete over description of how good it is. Expected safe life, 10 years. Blah, blah, blah. First of all, knock his house apart. Secondly, financial benefits of these things. It's on a slightly different one, but that's it. This guy wrote about it. It wouldn't pay for itself in the 56 years that they said it was going to. It would take several millennia to pay itself back. So you could buy one of these things with an expected life of 10 years, which takes several millennia to pay itself back. So someone hasn't done the calculations. Actually, the wind-safe ones that David Cameron was looking at buying, if you put one up in a town, as opposed to in open countryside, the electronics to run the converters and things like that use more energy in a year than the wind turbine produced. So your very best trick with one of those to save the planet was to unplug it. So once again, that was sized at 12.5 meters a second, which is right off my scale here. This is a 9 kilowatt proven. 6 kilowatt proven. This is a bigger wind turbine. Those are 1 kilowatts. This is about 6. It's a much better thing. As the scale goes up, the value gets much, much better. Those huge ones, like I showed at the beginning, they're really pretty good. Sometime over the summer, 10% of Britain's energy resources were produced from renewable purposes, but very little of them came from wind, say, 1000s. The thing we can see is that you get a payback period of maybe typical wind speeds of about 4 meters per second. So you get a payback period of about 25 years with that. So that's about the smallest size that's worth putting up. Notice 12.5 meters per second doesn't even occur on my notes there. So once again, think about what you're doing. Look at the numbers. Decide what's going on. Don't just think that a wind turbine's a good thing to put up and you therefore want to do it. You've got to look at where you're putting them up, what the size of them is, what the efficiency, what the upkeep is, what the utilization factor is, and all these different things for putting them up. You mustn't just think, I want one of those, I'm going to get one, it's good for me, it's good for the planet. The only person that was good for was B&Q, and not even that in the long run. So there we are. Payback period about 25 years. Just before I do that one, as a Guardian reader, hence my thoughts on David Cameron, there was an article on Saturday. I won't ask who read The Guardian on Saturday, I suspect it's all of you. And it said that there was an Australian study which said that people started feeling ill when there were wind turbines put up in their area. The reason it then goes on to say why they felt ill is because people told them they would be feeling ill. So actually some of the perception of these things, I don't know what other form of perception you can get, is actually what people are being told to believe. So if you start doing, there's another thing on the BBC website on set. I was ill over the weekend, so I didn't have much else to do. On the BBC website about what the paper said on Sunday morning, and there was a thing from the Daily Mail saying global warming is always wrong. And this is one of the things, evidently, that the Daily Mail disapproves of. So what they do is they find all the information they can, and they have this corroborated by great luminaries of the renewable energy world and climate changing world, like Lord Lawson and things like that. So they've actually got a complete little industry which builds itself up. Solar panels. These should be a really good idea, and I should say they're a very good idea because I've got a PhD student doing a project on them at the moment. But they may not be a good idea this north in this country. I've also got a large contract from a company who builds them, so I should be careful what I say here. So solar panels, not to be confused with solar PV, they produce hot water, as it says there. Yeah, hot water. Sun comes through there, hits the black plate, heats up this area between the cover plate and the other bit. That's hot, therefore the water circulating around them heats up and takes the heat away. So nice and simple, very few moving parts. You can build them very cheaply. They're brilliant until the moment when you try to do the calculation. Costs £2,000 to £4,000, price hasn't dropped that much. You can get in this country savings of about £92. That seems to give a payback period of, well, forever. And so somebody actually says, this does not sound a great deal of money, so it seems the only reason to install the system is for environmental purposes. God knows what that means, because it's clearly not going to be very good for the environment. As you start moving down to different parts of the world, as these scales start going up, all of these equations start changing. In Spain, there's a huge solar-powered solar-powered site which is over several acres, where they've got lots of little mirrors beaming the sun up toward on a tower where they run power stations, a conventional power station. And these are really a good thing to do. But there, it's sunnier, it's warmer, and they've got a lot of unused flat land. So once again, don't take what I'm saying as don't do these things. All I'm saying is look at the numbers, see what the numbers mean, and then decide whether you're making the right decision. Because clearly, it's going to take energy to build these devices, these solar panels and things like that. And that energy is stuff we want to get back. Roughly speaking, I've never actually seen it written down properly, but it's something I sort of believe, which probably isn't a good place. But if something doesn't pay back in financial terms, it doesn't pay back in energy terms. So if this has got a payback period 20 to 40 years in terms of money, it may also have a payback period of 20 to 40 years in terms of energy. So you may never get the energy back that you're trying to save. Photovoltaics, here's one. So when you've got your photovoltaics, they're these things that people are beginning to put up on their house. Notice they're shiny, the other ones are dark because they have to absorb energy. These are slightly different. These directly convert the photons from the sun into electricity. And photons are little packets of energy. They are actually already in the form of work. So what we can do, what we should be able to do, is just trap these and convert them into electricity because they're already electromagnetic radiation. The efficiency of conversion somewhere between 4 and 20%. The cost is dropping, and this is good news because there will be a time when they are worth having. There we are. 10 to 16 pence per kilowatt hour, currently 60 to 70. I've got a better graph here that I managed to acquire. Price keeps on dropping. We're currently about here. It's on its way down. And they're going to get cheaper and cheaper. We can tell this by the fact that these work exactly the opposite way to the LED light bulbs that we're beginning to get. We're beginning to be able to afford LED light bulbs, so they still cost a huge amount of money. In a bit we'll be able to afford these. But at the moment, the payback period is enormous. Feed-in tariff. There we are. So the government, in its wisdom, I use this word wisdom in its broadest sense, decided that they'd like to get this business, this photovoltaics, renewable energy, going as a business. And when they first put them in, they put them in at 46p per kilowatt hour, and it turned into a scam. Because interest rates were so low, you could get about a 10%, by the time they were running up and running properly, you get something like a 12% return on investment in a time when your ISAs were getting about 2% return on investment, and people were doing all sorts of things just to invest their money in these, because you get 46p per kilowatt hour for the next 25 years on the ones that you put in. And it was busy turning into a scam. And the money to pay for this comes from you and me, because the cost of these was tacked onto people's electricity bills, and we're then all paying for people to get a return on investment of about 12%. This did in a way work, because as people were producing more and more of these, and as more and more companies started up to put them in, the price dropped, and the price got lower and lower, and your return on investment got even better. And the government has now lowered more and more to, it's now 15.4 pence per kilowatt hour. But that's looking better, because they've been scaling. And what actually has come up is that there have been lots of little businesses that have started to put these things on your roof. The problem being, of course, that most of the money has ended up in China, where these are now mass-produced, and the price is dropping lower and lower. So what we've done is we've added money onto our electricity bills to help the flagging Chinese economy. Good. I'll just stop there. Are there any questions before I carry on with polemic?
Can I just ask you, are you assuming that the price of the electricity against which you're making the comparison is some kind of constant, and that, for example, petrochemical-based energy won't rise astronomically in price due to scarcity in the future, which will make the comparison more feasible?
Yes, but hopefully the price of these will carry on dropping, and there comes a point, let me see if I can actually go up at all. There comes a point where they become viable. And we're hoping that the cost of energy going up like that, and the cost of these, for example, coming down here, will cross. What we're trying to do at the moment is invest here for an energy cost of the future. So in the same way that when we bought our first compact fluorescent light bulb, it cost about £10 about 15 years ago, and you can now get them for about 99p. What happens is, if you wait and the industry doesn't collapse, which it's not very likely to, the cost of these things will drop so much that anything you put in there has gone past its sell-by date and its efficiency date by the time you get to a crunch point. So what we have to hope is that the technology gets good enough. And what I'm saying at the moment is, the only reason why anyone would want to put these things on their roof is for the government grant. And therefore, we have to think about what we're actually doing for the environment for these. Because once again, if it's going to cost that much to actually buy, have that long a payback period, they may not last that long. The efficiency of the new ones is all, I didn't put the efficiency graph up, but the efficiency is also going up all the time. What we're putting on our roof now, by the time we actually come to crunch point with the energy, is going to be, is not going to be viable. So it's a difficult balancing act, but yeah, it does assume that. But it's a polemic. Can't go with it. So there we are. So this is my next bit of hated technology. These are becoming more and more popular at the moment. Ground source, and particularly the next one I'm going on about, air source heat pumps. What we find is if we dig down into the earth, the temperature becomes more and more constant, at about, as it says there in Glasgow, as Edinburgh, about at about 9 or 10 degrees. So once you get down deep enough, it's about 9 or 10 degrees, which is warmer than we are in the outside temperature in, say, winter. So there must be some way of using that heat, using that extra warmth, to help out with our energy, to heat our houses. It's not really warm enough to heat your house, though my office has on various occasions been down to about 8 degrees. What we can do is we can get that heat from, by passing water, which is colder than it. Remember, heat goes from hot place to cold place, through some coils, which could be in the earth, either horizontally like that, so it warms up, or possibly vertically like this, deep down into the earth. So we put the colder water, colder than our 8 degrees, and it comes back warmer than we put it down. So we've gained heat in doing so. But once again, as I said, my office isn't very good at 8 degrees, and neither is heating your house at 8 degrees. So we have to use what we are able to extract as energy in a form which will let us heat things up. And for that we use a bit of technology. Here are a few pictures. There we are, drilling holes, trenching for the coils. This is not a picture from the Somme, it's actually some coils ready to go in and things like that. We heat them, we get that sort of low-grade heat at sort of 6, 7 degrees. We turn into things that we can heat our house with using basically a refrigerator. I'll cover this in a few seconds. Quite often we use things like underfloor heating, which has got a very large area, and therefore we can get away with less actual temperature. As we'll discover, temperature is one of the killers. The other thing that's the absolute killer is that if you keep on taking energy out of the ground, it cools down, and once it starts actually getting below freezing and starts freezing, you can, the heat transfer rate drops enormously, and then you actually have to leave it to warm up. You can get around this because you can run them in reverse in summer and use them for cooling the place, but then you're paying money for cooling, which is not necessarily a good idea. Good. As I said, I like numbers, I like thermodynamics. And what we've got here is a heat pump. A heat pump is a refrigerator when we think about the other side of it. When we think about our refrigerators, there's a cold bit inside your fridge. There is a warm bit, usually covered in dust, at the back of your refrigerator that hums. And what happens is the cold bit is colder than the inside of your refrigerator. The hot bit is hotter than your kitchen, and therefore you can move heat from your inside of your refrigerator into your kitchen. And you do that with a pump. So we're putting work into the pump in order to move heat from a cold place to a hot place. This doesn't break any of the laws of thermodynamics because we're moving heat from a hot place to a cold place, from a hot place to a cold place, and we're putting in work to do that. What we find is that we can define how good these are. And we use these terms here, coefficient of performance, which is the useful heat divided by the work input. This is the amount of heat that we move, for every bit of work that we input. So ideally we want that number to be as high as possible so we can move as much heat as possible with as little work as possible, which is in effect the efficiency. Unfortunately, the second law of thermodynamics, I did state that would comes in to limit that maximum coefficient of performance. And these are temperatures in degrees Kelvin. But what this shows is that as the difference between the high temperature and low temperature gets bigger, the coefficient of performance drops. So we can move the most heat for the minimum amount of work if we're doing it over a very small temperature difference. Don't worry. So what we actually find, and don't forget people are selling these things, what we actually find is that we get our coefficient of performance, and depending on what we want to do with them, it drops lower and lower. If we've got underfloor and hot air heating, which is about 35 degrees, if your hot air heating is any more than 35 degrees, you end up with what we call a fan oven, burn people. you get a coefficient of performance of about 4 through that. So each bit of work you put in, you can get 4 times as much heat moved. Sounds pretty good. If you start using radiators, you might go to 45 degrees, it drops to 3. Hot water is about 2.5. Now that still sounds pretty good, because we can get 2.5 times as much heat moved as we put in work. Fortunately, things get even worse. As I showed, if you want to put in a ground source heat pump, you have to either dig some very deep holes or dig up your garden or something like that. So an easier thing for builders to put in so they can claim their green credentials, don't forget you can get green grants on this sort of stuff, is the air source heat pump. Now, an air source heat pump is exactly the same as a ground source heat pump, except instead of digging up your garden, you put one of these in your, well, drive in that case. And what happens is this provides the heat. So you put heat into this, so you put a fluid into this which is colder than the outside, therefore heat goes from the outside to the inside. We use our heat pump in the same way to raise it to a higher quality of energy. And that's how it works. So it's quite compact, we don't dig our thing up, but unfortunately it is spectacularly poor. When I put in these numbers in the brackets, I don't know what that bracket's doing now, it should be 2.5, but what you find, as I said, the closer together the temperatures that you're trying to pump between the inside and the outside, the more heat you can move. So that means on a cold day, the temperatures are bigger. And on a cold day, you want more energy out of it. So if we've got a really cold day, it went down to about -10 at our house a couple of years ago, and we've got underfloor heating, you might get about 3 times as much moved. If you want to move hot water, twice as much. If you're going to use a conventional radiator, which the British standard says you want to put your energy in at 75 degrees, you're down to a factor 2 or even 1.5. So on the cold day when you want it to work well, it's working very badly. Also issues about condensation and problems like that. So already not very good. But the problem is, and I'm surprised nobody's picked me up on this yet, is the fact that what we're doing is we're pumping the heat from a cold place to a hot place using work, and work usually in the form of electricity. And where do we get the electricity from conventionally? Burning stuff. Coal, gas, whatever. And if we burn things, we get held up once again by the second law of thermodynamics, that damn second law of thermodynamics. And what we find here is that there's a maximum efficiency that we can convert heat, which is burning stuff, into work, which is electricity. And that's related in exactly the same way. Actually, this is about reciprocal in the previous equation. I went one over it. So the higher the temperature difference we pump between we have between our hot bit and our cold bit, the greater the efficiency of our system. So we want our hot bit to be as hot as possible, and our cold bit in our power production system to be as cold as possible. So what we can do is we can then just make some easy calculations. So we've got to do it. But bear in mind that if you're going to use electricity in any case, so if you were going to use electric heaters, storage heaters or something like that, then your efficiency of power production will be 1, and then your ground source heat pump will be a very good thing because you are actually increasing the amount of heat you get from each bit of electricity you would have used. So here's a little table that I've knocked up. So we typically produce electricity from power stations in this country at about 40%. So we can see that if our coefficient of performance is 3, which as I've said isn't a particularly great day, we're saving about 1/6 of our energy. And if it's a cold day outside, it's actually costing us more in total primary energy use to run our ground source or air source heat pump than it would be if we just used light bulbs or something like that to heat our things up from. So you can get grants from the government or the Green Energy Scheme to put in ground source and air source heat pumps, but they're not necessarily a good thing. And what I'm pointing out here is that if you sit down and you do some calculations, you might actually discover that it's a really good thing to put in financially because of all these grants and things you get. But actually from the point of view of energy, there are some negative numbers around it. You're actually doing the world more harm by putting in some renewable energy features. Good. Doing just about all right for time. The other one which people are very keen on at the moment is biofuels and biomass. You can burn straw willow pellets off cuts of wood. I think they burned cows at one point. So that you can get yourself a biomass boiler like this where you feed pellets in and it heats your house up. That's brilliant. Renewable resource, wood, great stuff. There are some problems involved. First of all, they're expensive, about £5,000 compared to about £2,000 for a standard boiler, and you have to buy fuel. And because of the way things are set up, the people who sell fuel price it only just lower than the equivalent price of oil and gas. If oil and gas goes up, the biofuel goes up as well at the same rate. This was from the BBC website about a week ago. So once again, to get these biofuels, you have to get them from somewhere. Quite a lot of them come from people chopping down rainforests to plant palm oil. They start land grabs, increase global food prices. When the Americans some time ago went for a biofuel thing, they started importing corn oil from Mexico, and that made tortillas, that put tortillas out of the cost, out of the affordability of a lot of Mexican peasants and things like that. So the Americans, trying to do what they thought would be the right thing to encourage renewable energy and biofuels, actually caused people to starve. I think they stopped that after a while. But these are things of unthought of consequences. And you know, before you do something like say, let's use 10% biofuels and other things, actually think about what the ramifications are going to be. This leads on to the next bit. Don't get too carried away with it. As a thermodynamicist, the Rankine cycle is the most common way, basically, in the world of producing electricity. Don't worry too much. Actually, don't worry too much about anything here. I can see some horrified faces. My kids didn't like this either. Well, maybe when they're 5 they will. So. There we go. So what you do is you burn your fuel. That can be anything. As I said, it's straw, coal. The early nuclear power plant also used this to produce the stuff. So you get high pressure, high temperature water there. You stick it through a turbine there. The turbine takes that high pressure, high temperature water or steam. It takes energy out of it. It extracts work from it in the form of rotation. So put a generator on there and produce electricity. Then comes the bit which is probably most important for the moment, which is the condenser. In order to run this as a cycle like that, you have to get the steam back into a hot, high temperature condition. So you have to turn it back into, in order to run the turbine between a high pressure and low pressure, you've got to have a low pressure here. So you need a condenser to cool it down and drop its pressure. Then you pressurize it back up, add temperature to it, and you go round and round. But this bit here is unfortunately a required bit of the cycle. So when you go around any power station, as I'm sure you do in your spare time, you find these things. These are about 100 meters, 60 to 100 meters tall. These are the condensers. So what happens is, inside, they pump the water up to the top, they spray it in there. At the bottom of these, they're lifted up, so these work like a chimney. Air goes up, takes heat out of the sprayed water, and makes it condense down the bottom. And then what comes out of the top, they lose a certain percentage of it there as steam. So what comes out of it is just pure steam, it's not polluting or anything like that. But this is a required bit, and once again, the second law of thermodynamics tells us that we have to throw away some of the energy that we use, that we burn, in order to produce work. So because, as I said at the beginning, it's very easy for us to turn work into heat, but much harder to turn heat into work. Then if we want to turn heat into work, we need these big systems, and we have to throw away a proportion of the energy. Something like 60% of the energy that we burn in it gets thrown away in those. So what we can do, oops, come back. What we can do is we can use that. Here's the equation once again, which we've seen before, which tells us that our maximum efficiency is stipulated by the temperature of our boiler that we're burning our stuff out and the temperature that our condensers are working at. So this is typically about 60-70% for the best systems, but for gas turbine cycles, cheap ones, they're about 30%. Most of our power plants are about 42%. The latest gas-fired one's about 53%. Nuclear power stations about 28%. So what we can do is, instead of throwing that heat away in a condenser like that and throwing it to the outside world, we can actually trap that heat, which is at which can be at a usable temperature, and pump it round buildings and things like that. And the university itself, Pond's Forge, the city council buildings are all heated based on this sort of system. The stuff that you throw into your bin every week ends up going through what's the Bernard Road incinerator, where they burn it. And in the old days, they used to burn it and let the stuff go up the top and get wasted. And Jim Swithenbank, a professor in chemical engineering, convinced them to put some heat exchangers up the side of it. So now they trap that heat and pump it round all those buildings. So the stuff that we get heated by is stuff that would otherwise get wasted. And if you look at the front of any of our buildings, they've all got EPCs on them, which are energy performance certificates, and they're all really high. They're all C's and D's. And that's not because our buildings are any good, and indeed they're mostly appalling, but because we get our energy from such a low carbon source, they get very good ratings. So we're actually being heated here by a waste system. So we can do something. By doing that, you can get utilizations of somewhere between 70 and 90%. However, there are some idiots out there. There we are. So this is an old one, I'll admit. But group of Greenpeace volunteers shut down Occupy Britain's flagship waste incineration in South London to protect the health of Britain's children. First of all, I presume most of the children are alive. And secondly, this was a combined heat and power system, which was probably the most effective use of burning anything, particularly if they're burning waste, in this country. So think about what people are doing. I see my time's come to an end. I've got a few more slides, but I shall stop there. Think about what people are doing. Look at what the energy means. Don't just rely on what people tell you. Remember, you can do calculations, and like things like what Richard was asking about the cost of fuel going up, remember that we do have to go through a process of starting off buying things to keep businesses going. We need early adopters and things like that, but don't just leap onto something for the sake of doing it, and think about what your actions are. If you're going to try to shut something down, there are much better things to shut down. I shall finish there and answer any questions, which I'm sure you've got. There we are. I have my last slide. My last. Good, thank you very much.